Welcome. I've never functioned in this room. It has two qualities I find. One is a little greater intimacy, but I find it a little more intimidating. I hope that that does not transfer to the people from the Ministry of Finance who will have to answer some questions. All right, I want to welcome all the officials from the Ministry of Finance, all the officials from the Auditor General's Department, members of the media, if they are present. Yes. Are they? Yes. And if there are any members in the public gallery, welcome to you too. Now, the purpose of a meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, and certainly this one, is to examine the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year 2016, and in this particular case, Ministry of Finance. And I want to indicate how we got here. What we did is that we had the Auditor General and his team come in, and we engaged them generally on the 2016 report with some comparison to 2015, and asking some, besides the general issues and the questions that recur, we might have asked some more specific questions about particular ministries or institutions. And so we have now gone to the Ministry of Finance, because this is our main revenue and expenditure allocation ministry in a fundamental way. And you do the budget, you align yourself with policy, and therefore that is why we are going to you now as we look at the Auditor General's report. This committee is desirous of hearing the challenges being faced by the key stakeholders of the Ministry of Finance in an attempt to determine some of the possible solutions to these challenges. The role of the committee is to help the Ministry of Finance improve its delivery of services in an efficient, effective, and economic manner. So we'll ask you relevant questions, tough questions, but our general rule is developmental in nature and corrective if we feel that something needs to be addressed or the Auditor General flags it, so on. All right, now this meeting is being held Was it turned off all the time? No. Okay. This meeting is being held in public and will be broadcast on Parliament Channel 11 and Radio 105.5 FM and on Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. I will begin by asking members of the Ministry of Finance to introduce themselves, and then I will ask the members of the Auditor General's Department to introduce themselves, and the members of the committee here, we will introduce ourselves, and then I'll give the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance to give a kind of overview. You all right with that? Yeah, and then following that we'll begin the questions. Okay? All right, so Ministry of Finance, would you introduce yourselves? Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'm Vishnu Danapoli, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. And to my left.
Good morning, my name is Suzette Lichi. I'm Permanent Secretary, Acting Ministry of Finance.
Morning, Chairman. My name is Glenn Singh, Acting Comptroller, Customs and Excise.
Good morning, all. My name is Karen Sibaran Timothy, Acting Comptroller of Accounts.
Good morning. I'm Alison Raphael, Chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue.
Good morning. Nayak Ramdain, Commissioner, Audit and Compliance.
Good morning. Lisa Phillips, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Yvonne Nimacharan, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary. Good morning. Michelle Durham Kisoon, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Maharaj, Acting Treasury Director, Controller of Accounts.
Good morning, Jennifer Khan, Acting Director of Contract, Central Tenders Board.
Good morning, Shirma Thompson Sukra, Customs and Excise Accountant 4.
Good morning, Savitri Sipasad, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary.
Auditor General's Office.
Hi, good morning, Laurie Pujadas, Deputy Auditor General, Acting Auditor General. The Auditor General is on vacation at this point in time.
Good morning, Gary Peters, Assistant Auditor General.
Good morning all, Nicole Kuburn, Legal Officer, Auditor General's Department.
Good morning, Brian Caesar, Audit Executive 2.
Good morning, Gayatri Maharaj, Assistant Auditor General.
Good morning, Neela Dwarka Ali, Audit Director.
Good morning, Jacqueline Digans, Audit Executive 1.
Okay, and well, my name is Bo Tiwari. I'm chairman of the committee and a member.
Roger Samuel, member.
Good morning, everyone. Jennifer Rafu, member.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. And as you know, we are here to engage some of the issues in the Auditor General's report and also based on your own response. We have two responses to you, from you, sorry. One based on the some of the questions that you sought to clarify, and the second one has to do with some responses based on comments we made on the 2015 Auditor General's report. But before we get into that, I will ask Permanent Secretary Dan Paul if he'd make an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning again to you and the members of the committee. Just want to thank you for inviting us, firstly. We appreciate it, and also to thank the Auditor General, in this case the Acting Auditor General, for her comments and observations. This gives us an opportunity at the Ministry of Finance to respond to some of those comments and observations. Essentially, the objective of the Ministry of Finance is to not be referenced in the report at all. However, it's not an ideal world. It's not an ideal state that we live in, and given that, given the mandate of the Ministry of Finance, what we try to do instead is to try to minimize the amount of times that the Ministry of Finance is referenced in the report. The Ministry of Finance is in a continuous mode of continuous improvement, I should say. And this can be seen through such projects as the PFM, the Public Financial Management System, the Integrated Financial Management System, the Implementation of the Procurement Act, improvements in the internal audit process, implementation of the cash-based IPSAS, significant changes in the pension division of the Ministry of Finance, essentially also in the, as it pertains to the IT. And finally, I'd just like to say that my colleagues and myself, as a team, we are here to give answers in full transparency and with a significant level of candor. Thank you, Chairman.
You've kind of set the agenda because of the nature of your report and some of the things that you've made reference to having to do with some of the questions we had asked or some of the comments we had made, recommendations we had made based on the 2015 report. So the first thing I will ask is about the integrated financial management information system. And for the understanding of the public, I want to indicate that that integrated financial management system is really one that would link the Ministry of Finance and other ministries in such a way that financial information will be available at all times to the Ministry of Finance. And more than that, it would be possible for the Ministry of Finance to get information on, let's say, expenditure in any particular area or in the ministry as a whole in a timely manner, that is to say, basically to make it always available. So that this is a very important system in terms of the efficiency and effectiveness of the management of finance within the ministerial system of government. And I just wanted to ask, you know, notwithstanding the responses that you've given me here, where are we in terms of that system, and when can we expect a system to be at least get to the point of first testing to know that it is likely to be operational?
Chairman, just to mention on the IFMIS, the IFMIS cannot be seen by itself. You have to look at the entire public financial management reform system. And the public financial management reform system the reforms began in October of 2016. And there are two broad areas: the technical foundation, and secondly, purchasing of the IFMIS itself. And I will expand on both. As far as the technical foundation is concerned, it's essentially designed for the modernization of the operation functions in the areas of budget, treasury, and IT operations. And this is very critical. It's going to change the way in which, obviously, we do business, and the way we do budgeting, and in the way in which treasury responds to the general public. Okay. Secondly, we are well advanced as far as the public financial management system is concerned, and the FMIS, in that this is the furthest we have reached in history as far as the implementation is concerned. As far as the technical foundation of the system is concerned, we are hiring long-term consultants. As you know, the public financial management unit is already in existence. We expect the PFM to be rolled out, I would say, if things go, other things being equal, I would say in about 18 months to 2 years. The IFMIS itself, about 4 to 5 years. It's a very complex issue, but we are well on the way to getting it done.
Okay, let's say from a citizen's point of view, looking at this and thinking, well, why does it have to take 4 or 5 years to have a system like this functional? Is there a good answer you would say for that?
Well, there's not a good answer, but the proper answer would be that, as I said, it's a complex situation, and it's been phased. So essentially, we're going through the first phase of selecting consultants. We're in the first phase of procuring the IFMIS itself, and that's where we are right now. So I would say the PFM, as I said earlier, should be about 2 years, and once we get the PFM itself into place, the IFMIS will follow. It may be 4 years, it may be a shorter time.
What will the PFM allow you to do?
I will just... The Treasury Director.
Yeah, okay.
Good day, everyone, again. As PS said, reform will actually take between 4.5 years to 5 years. But there are many sub-reforms that must take place before we introduce the Integrated Financial Management Information System, which will allow us to record expenditure and revenue on a real-time basis. So what I can add to what the PS said is that the first year will be to get the procurement finalized and in place for the system itself, testing and customization, 12 to 14 months to implement. But before that, those sub-reforms, as I just mentioned, requires that these must be done before the implementation, and what these are is that there must be approval for the new chart of accounts for the recording of revenue and payments, and the approval of a manual that defines the international public sector accounting standards. And this standards is a new reporting format for the accounting framework, which will reside in the IFMIS system. It's a framework for policies and procedures which will embed all of the accounting rules so that the IFMIS will be a much more modern way of operating our financial business. Also,
so you're going to be going to an accrual system, is that it?
Not in the first instance. In the first instance, we will adopt a cash basis accounting, and then later on move to an accrual basis, because the cash basis is how we operate presently.
At the present time, yeah.
Yes. Also, we need to have an approved internal audit charter, and of course, this defines the new version of the internal audit function and approval of manuals that define the internal audit standards and internal audit procedures. So these are sub-reforms that must take place and must be completed before the implementation of a IFMIS, because this is the framework which is embedded into the IFMIS system itself. So presently, we are in this initial phase of the reform.
Okay, but are you thinking of these sequentially, or can they be done simultaneously, which would, in my view, shorten the time? It may impose some learning requirements that are much more severe and internalization, but how are you approaching it? Sequentially or simultaneously?
Simultaneously. In this year, there have been terms of reference for consultants on budget reform, treasury reform, reform of the internal audit function, and for the IT supervisor of the IFMIS project. These were approved by IDB in April 2017, and some shortlisting have already taken place. However, the IDB also, they have their process to take place. For example, the non-objection, which was attained in June. But given the normal lead time associated with the evaluation, selection, official non-objections to the selected consultants, contract preparation, this should be completed by November of this year, 2017.
All right, I will leave this. I just want to ask one more question. Yeah, you want to add something, P.S.?
Chairman, just to clarify the role of the IDB, just quickly, because the comptroller mentioned the IDB.
Yes.
The IDB, a loan was taken from the IDB for $40 million US to develop the IFMIS system. And that's why the IDB is involved.
Yes, okay. Yeah, well, I'm aware. I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned it in your statement, your opening statement, the issue of procurement and how far along are we in terms of preparation of the ministerial system of government, if not the whole system, the whole state system? How far are we in terms of being prepared to function in accordance with the new procurement law when proclaimed?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to start off, but I'll let P.S. Michelle Durham-Kisoon continue, because she's responsible for the procurement, the implementation of procurement. But just to say, this week Cabinet will be discussing the final organizational structure for each ministry. As far as the procurement units are concerned, we are working, as you know, we've been asked by the President to assist in getting a firm to hire the procurement regulator, as far as that, on the assistance of the President, that we didn't ask. Secondly, we are well on the way to organizing the Central Tenders Board as far as the staff is concerned, and what we're going to do with the staff at the Central Tenders Board. Because as you're aware, Chairman, when the Procurement Act is fully proclaimed, there'll be no more Central Tenders Board. So we're putting things in place to deal with the staff. But for further details, I'll pass you over to PS Durham Kisu.
Thank you, Chair. As PS Dan Paul just indicated, the ministries and departments have submitted for consideration designs for their organizational units. As PS also indicated, these units are being discussed, and once these units are approved, they may recruit staff for these units. In addition, we have been working closely with the UNDP for training of persons to bring the necessary skills in procurement. But there are also workshops that the UNDP has been spearheading to advise the ministries and departments to be prepared. The UNDP has drafted, for the assistance of ministries and departments, handbook, the model handbook that is required by legislation for approval by the regulator. And the UNDP has assisted ministries and departments in customizing this handbook. There have been a series of workshops that occurred in April, and the ministries and departments were asked to highlight change leaders. Their responsibility would be to spearhead the change management process that will take place in their respective ministries and departments. And these change leaders, Chair, were the ones who were exposed to these workshops. The UNDP also worked with us in helping us with the special guidelines. They also did a training of trainers in the internal controls to manage the whole process. And there was also a training of trainers for persons to go out to highlight to accounting officers how they need to, the systems that they need to have in place to be in readiness for the rollout of this legislation.
I think what you've indicated is a lot of work has gone on, and you feel you pretty much prepared to align once the system comes on stream after proclamation.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. All right, Senator Samuel.
Oh, just a quick question. Oftentimes, softwares and systems and programs in the public sector seems to take a mighty long time to get going when compared to private enterprises. If a private enterprise and conglomerate wanted to install and utilize softwares of this manner, when you compare the time frame, I'm sure that if this was being done in the private sector, in a conglomerate, it may not take 5 years, 6 years. I wonder why, when compared to the public sector and the private sector, things seems to take much longer. And then by the time it's installed and it's used, then there needs to be further upgrades, and because technology is advancing all the time, systems are being advanced, and then there is a whole process again. Why does it take so long compared to the private enterprises?
Thank you, Senator. I'll start off the response and then I'll ask the Deputy Comptroller to respond. But as you know, we are guided by something called the Exchequer and Audit Act. We're also guided by something called the regulations, the financial regulations. So we have to put things in place accordingly. In the private sector, you may find that these things may work faster, but or be implemented faster. However, we're dealing with close to 80,000 public servants, both daily paid and monthly paid public servants. So it's a bit of a larger task than I would think that most private sector entities. So we have to stick within, just to summarize, we have to stick with the what we consider to be the correct legislation. We are guided by the legislation and the sheer magnitude of the exercise.
Well, let me start with saying thank you all for being here. I think we all have an interest in seeing Trinidad and Tobago progress, and I thank you all for your work on behalf of our country. My main question is about, following up on Senator Samuel's questions. Why the delays? Is it that we have technology that is outdated? Is it that we have logistical issues because the ministry does have to work with so many different entities across the country and different units within it? Or is it human error? And if so, what are the accountability mechanisms? How do we identify what the problems and the backlogs are in the system? And how do we move our country forward? Because you all work in this on a day-to-day basis, you all have the information at hand and really the expertise in how we move Trinidad and Tobago forward. So I'd really like to hear from all of you, or whoever feels best to answer, perhaps the EPS, how we can identify what really are the causes of the backlogs and how we can go forward.
Chair, through you, I'd like to, if I answer the second question, I'd like to really complete the question, to answer the question from the Vice Chairman. And it really concerns why the time frame is that long. Now, it is expected that the IFMIS will be fully operational at the end of 4.5 to 5 year period. However, the many steps that we need to take are very important in order to have successful implementation. And just to give you an idea of what we've done so far concerning the purchase and installation of the IFMIS solution, expressions of interest from July 13th based on the request from the bidders. The IDB approved the evaluation committee, and it is anticipated that given the normal time associated with the evaluation of bids, obtaining official non-objections to the selected bidder, finalization the overall project plan with the prospective vendor. This should be concluded between the period August to December of 2017. Thereafter, the installation of the system will take place. And this installation of the system will take place, but on a phased basis, because it requires us to be careful about how we go about implementation. In the first instance, there will be the budget execution module, which will be implemented, and then thereafter, other modules. So that in the 4.5 to 5 years' time, there will be full implementation of the IFMIS. Does that answer your question as well?
I wanted to clarify. So my question wasn't about IFMIS in particular, but about the incomplete reporting and data. To be specific, I just found the paragraph that was in the Auditor General's report for 2016. It said, the findings as set forth in chapters 2 to 4 include examples of weaknesses in the internal control systems, as well as non-compliance with legislative requirements and/or financial directives. Comments also cover the lack of proper maintenance of the relevant subsidiary books and records. The state of the internal audit function in ministries and departments remains a matter of grave concern as in previous years. So my question wasn't about that particular project, but about why so many delays in reporting and data collection, and the concern from the Auditor General's office about the gravity of the situation when it comes to lack of proper maintenance of books.
In most instances, the reasons for the backlog and delays in reporting is because of the manual system that we operate in and utilizing physical documentation rather than an automated system. Also, a high turnover of staff is also contributes to that fact as well. Training is very important, and did mention the internal audit as well. And of course, in the public financial management reform, there is a component for internal audit. Agreed as well.
Senator, if I may also respond. I understand your frustration. You share my frustration. I want to use one example to explain my frustration, and that has to do with pension and leave records. It's totally unacceptable that someone would retire at 60 and not get their pension and gratuity until 63. My objective, if I could achieve that objective, you retire today and you get your pension tomorrow. It's as simple as that. There are several reasons why, and it has to do with delays throughout ministries and delays in getting information to the Treasury Department. But something as a pension, I think there's a human side to it. And there's no reason why, and it's something I've been discussing with the Treasury Division, there's no reason why at least 50% of the gratuity of every pensioner cannot be paid the next day after retirement, because the Treasury is fully aware of what the 100% should look like. And there's precedence. So even if you cannot pay the entire 100%, there should be at least 50% of this. It's right. Those are the kind of frustrations I know you're mentioning, the delays. I think the pension and leave example is a better example than even the internal audit example. And that's something we're trying very much, and maybe it will come up later in the discussion, we're trying very much to solve. I think if we can solve that, it will be a significant breakthrough as far as, I don't want to call it pension reform, but as far as the provision of pension when necessary for the retired public servant.
I really appreciate your answer. Can you give some more elaboration on how the pension system is being improved and any timelines that are being worked towards, any objectives?
Senator, through you, Chairman, I would respond firstly and then again to the Deputy Comptroller. But we were working within a time, especially fixing the IT. The perfect situation is that you're 40 years old and you can go online and tell and know on your date of retirement what your pension will look like. That's a perfect system. I would like to get there within a time frame of maybe 2 years. Right now, we're working on an IT system within the pension division of the Treasury to track files. But you see, unfortunately, the Treasury does not operate in a vacuum. We have to depend on the other ministries. And when there are delays in the other ministries, you have delays at the Treasury Division. Okay, but just for more details, the Deputy Comptroller.
Senator, as PS indicated, we do rely on all other ministries and departments to submit to the Treasury reliable and accurate information, and oftentimes this is not so. What we have done in the interim, though, is that we work assiduously and closely with each ministry and department by establishing liaison officers that we have communication with on a direct basis instantly without having to do the internal memos and stuff and so on. And also what we've done is we've sort of re-engineered our internal processes to make it more efficient. We've cut down some time frames internally as well. We've also reassign staff from other sections, branches, so that we have more assistance in the pensions management branch. We've also looking at a closer look at full automation is being pursued, as the permanent secretary indicated. But definitely, we recognize that we do face many challenges. We do try to improve as best as we can and liaise with all the ministries and departments and our key stakeholder, the Auditor General.
That's a follow-up question on that. You were saying that there are delays in other ministries. Do you think it's because they're all paper-based manual systems? And if so, is there one ministry or one piece of legislation? Or how can we move forward to make sure that everyone's on the same page with making sure things are digitally transmitted and digitally collected?
If you don't mind, can you repeat the question?
Sure. It was a bit convoluted on that. My apologies. How do we identify a way forward so it's not just dependent on the ministry collecting data from other entities still manually to then make everything more efficient? How do we make sure the other ministries also are transmitting data? I know that there's been quite a bit of discussion about the fact that things are still manual and paper-based, and we don't yet have any legislation for electronic data transmission. So do you think that it's purely a legislative approach we need to take, or do you think it's technology, or do you think it's also better communication between the ministries?
It's a combination of all those factors, technology being important as well. And I think an interim or an alternative solution or system that can be recommended is the information for the preparation of the pensioner leave can be automatically generated from the Integrated Global Payroll Integrated Human Resource Information Systems database. But this will require that all core agencies are involved to have an integrated approach to the upgrade. And presently, we are pursuing an upgrade of the IGP IRIS system. In this upgrade, we can retrieve information on pension and leave as well, using the subset tables of the IGP IRIS. So this, in the short term, before we have a full solution, we can access information from that, so that we can improve payments, retiring benefits to pensioners on time. So ministries and departments can use the existing technology for the maintenance of the personal records. For example, the absence management module in the IRIS. And of course, with the upgrade, which is coming soon, after the contract signed, it's a go live of 9 months thereafter. The Comptroller of Accounts will commence a drive to ensure that all the key stakeholders input the relevant information so that the IGP IRIS system can be fully utilized and we can receive the benefits of it. Further, training, we can have more training. We do training on a not as regular as we wish to because of our human constraints, but we are liaising with the Public Services Academy to do training with respect, particularly with the interpretation of the Chief Personnel Officer, the circulars that they introduced. There are some interpretation issues by ministries preparing the pension leave records. So the automation, the training, the liaison officers, and the internal re-engineering of the treasuries or the pensions management business processes, we're trying to improve as best as we can.
You said earlier that there's a high turnover of staff. Can you comment on why?
Promotions, persons are being promoted to new positions, acting positions are becoming more available as the retirees are much more than than the employees coming into the service, so that the positions at the senior level are becoming more available. And this is why staff is, one of the reasons why staff is constantly moving. It's not like a turnover from one ministry to the next, but it's really an upward movement of staff in ministries and departments.
Mr. Samuel?
I want to follow up on the issue of the reassignment of public officers. And in many instances, when we interviewed, we had committees and ministries before the Public Accounts Committee, that stood out. And it was not just reassignments within the ministries themselves, immediate ministries, but they were reassigned to other ministries. Have you seen that as a reoccurring situation that we may not be able to get past? In your plan to implement your financial management system, have you taken into consideration that there is a possibility that in 5 years, a great deal of the staff that you have now, after training, may not be existing in the ministry itself in 5 years, and then there is a problem again? Have you taken that into consideration, and how do you plan to get past that?
Thank you, Senator. It's a problem throughout the public service. I remember a very good example of the public sector investment program and the creation of units to implement the public sector investment program throughout ministries. These units were set up to fast-track the implementation rate of the public sector investment program. And they were all staffed by qualified personnel. And within a year, the units were literally disintegrating because of the fact that all these people were doing so well in the units that they were all promoted out. We're going to try to avoid that. I don't know how we can do it within the confines of the public sector, public service, sorry. But it's something that we are giving consideration, and we are hoping to avoid as much as possible. We're trying to learn from that experience with the public sector investment program units.
Because I know that there's a struggle when it comes to the IRIS program. Can you tell the committee what percentage of the public service currently effectively use the IRIS program?
Thanks again, Senator. There's 100% coverage, but I like the comptroller also respond to that.
Just 1 second until I add a bit of information for you. With respect to the year 2017, the IGP IRIS production team continued to pay over 102,000 persons on the IGP IRIS system, while at the same time maintaining the corresponding HR records for 40,000 public servants.
So are you saying that when it comes to the IRIS system, that all of the relevant ministries and agencies are fully on board when it comes to the system?
Yes.
Okay.
You said that, P.S., when you were talking, you said that that part of the reason it took so long to basically get a system like the financial management system operational was because of legal constraints that you had. You mentioned the Exchequer Act, and I think you mentioned something else. Financial regulations. I mean, would it make sense, or is there an opportunity here to review the financial regulations and to modernize them and to deal with the Exchequer Act and make it much more relevant and appropriate to our time. And shouldn't we consider doing this rather than find ourselves in a box where we take a system that was designed to make us efficient and effective, which we end up constraining because of the backward legal framework that we have, which governs the operations? I mean, am I saying the obvious here, or shouldn't we do it? Yeah.
And I agree with you 100%. Those are two backward, archaic pieces of legislation.
Okay.
And as you correctly said, we find ourselves boxed in by these pieces of legislation, and they require immediate amendment.
Okay, so I mean, maybe we should address that issue of reforming and technologizing the financial system from the point of view of the amendments to the legislation that would be required to make that possible. Because I'm afraid from what you tell me that you are going to make the technology-driven system backward because of the existing legislation. And you will have to do it because you are legally bound to do so if you keep the legislation like that. Am I correct?
Very correct. Like, for instance, the law governing electric fund transfers is a good example, and the use of electronic signatures. This is very critical in the whole framework, but obviously we cannot do it.
You can't do it. All right. Well, we will take a note of that immediately, and one of the recommendations would certainly be to deal with the legislative side to facilitate a really progressive and enlightened technological solution through the ISMIS system. Okay? Because I feel that we are going to find ourselves in another problem 2 years from now, and maybe 5 years from now. We may be much more backward than we are at the present time. Go ahead.
If you could estimate how much potential improvement there could be in the backlogs because of the electronic signatures, that would be extremely helpful.
I would like to ask if you can rephrase the question, because
Sure.
backlogs in terms of which aspect?
Let's start with pensions. Would electronic signatures help with getting data faster between ministries, or would it
Yes.
help?
Yes, that would greatly improve the receipt of information, accurate information from the ministries, and with the approved or certified signatories. It will also improve the receipt of information from the budget division as well with the electronic signatures, and also all the areas where certifying signatures are needed. All of these areas will be improved greatly.
Okay.
One from the Auditor General's department. I mean, we just had that exchange here about the changes necessary in legislation to facilitate a much more enlightened system, progressive system. And we also had the business of the electronic signatures, etc., come up. Could I have a comment from the Auditor General if there are any problems, issues, or what you would like to see, what you think would be preferable to see? Yeah.
Chair, I will answer one aspect, and I will lead off to our IT people, Mr. Akarali and Ms. Gayatri Maharaj, to sort of further expand on what I'm saying. But let us take the pension and leave issue. I would want to say that one of the key features with the pension and leave signature is not so much the electric signature in that particular aspect, but I would support the Deputy Treasury Controller of Accounts in saying that if your information is inputted at source, So what does that mean? It means that your information utilizing the IRIS system, which means your records, your record of employment, your data, every aspect of your service is inputted at source, is matched with your payments. So therefore, everything is inputted and all the information is agreeing electronically. Then it will be easy for that record. So if I go to a ministry X, it doesn't matter, because I don't need a manual paper. All my information is there. My year-to-date information is there. My payments are there. My arrears are there. Everything is there on that system. And so therefore that would facilitate a more readily and easier way, because that is what we use to compute pension and leave. In terms of the electronic signature and the advantages and the disadvantages of that, I will lead off to our IT specialists in that regard.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As we are on the topic of electronic signature, we had suggested to Comptroller of Accounts and their team, when they were rolling out the IFMIS, that the Electronic Transaction Act and the part that deals with the electronic signature, although it has been proclaimed, it has not been in operation. And if you need electronic signature to authorize or even to verify that that is the receiver and sender, then we would need to have an authentication body that would issue a certificate or for a certificate of electronic signature. In the absence of that, then that would defeat the whole purpose of our IFMIS. So that needs to be done as soon as possible. In terms of the pensions, currently the upgrade of IRIS, if it's done properly, it would address the issue with pensions, because the modules in terms of position management, which would allow all positions in the public service to have a position number, and that would mean the timely input of information and the verification of those inputs that would lead to accurate information. Then we would have the timely generation of pension and leave record. So once we have all those controls in place in the current upgrade of the IFMIS, that should address your issues with the pension and leave.
What about the larger question of basically changing the legal framework to facilitate a more progressive solution to basically the management of finance in the country? You have any problems with that? You have any issues with that?
Well, previously, we did not speak with Mr. Danforth, but with the previous Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance, we ourselves have been looking at, we are embedded in what is ostensibly their legislation. And so, of course, that puts us limitations on us as well. So we've been having discussions with them in terms of modernizing not only their legislation, but for us to go forward in terms of having legal reform, a specific act that speaks to us as well. There are certain things that in that legislation which we do not feel we need to be part of. And it speaks to also the pension and leave, which is in the civil service regulations. And it also speaks to what is fundamentally, we believe, a treasury function, and that is the application of credits, which is involved in the processing. So there, it is my understanding, though, that there has been some consideration of the modernization of the Legislative Act for the Finance, and I believe that they have been looking at that in terms of how that will impact on the IFMIS. I know that there has been some consideration of that as well. So I think the Ministry of Finance is well aware that there needs to be a modernization of that Exchequer Act to ensure that the IFMIS is actually implemented, because without that you cannot implement the IFMIS system. So I think Mr. Danforth.
All right, so that this is a high item on the agenda, and else it'll just frustrate everything else. We've got to make that very specific recommendation. And this is taking place at the Ministry of Finance. And I don't want, I think it's important not to get the argument bogged down in terms of current functioning of institutions. It must be legislation to facilitate an enlightened and modern system that has built-in flexibility in it, because that's the way technology operates. to allow the country to simply advance as technology advances, and therefore we continue to be current with what the rest of the, what can I say, enlightened world is doing. And if you get bogged down with what Auditor General is supposed to do and what Ministry of Finance constraints are and so on, we will never progress, because it will then become an argument about self-interest. And what we really need is a system to have the country advance. And within that system, we may then have to have the reforms that are necessary, whether it's the autonomy of the Attorney General's office, maybe it's much more autonomy of individual offices within the financial system. But, of course, built-in accountability, because you now have on-time information, real-time information, that is then easily auditable, and it may have implications for internal audit as well, which, of course, as we know, is a big bugbear in the public service system as a whole. Okay? All right. Would any of the senators like to ask anything at this point? Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to ask about the state-owned entities that haven't submitted their reports. In the Auditor General's report for 2016, there was a list of about 20 to 25 different entities. Some of them hadn't submitted reports since 2009. Are there any repercussions when they don't? And how do we make the system better for all the citizens and the taxpayers?
Senator, I'll respond initially, and then the Acting Permanent Secretary responsible for state enterprises will follow up. But just to let you know, I find it totally unacceptable that boards, that members and chairmen of boards could sit on a board for a full 5-year term and not insist on audited financial statements. They are guided by the State Enterprises Performance Manual, and which spells out in no uncertain terms that they must provide audited financial statements on time. To be 8 years behind schedule is totally unacceptable. And we have had many instances of that, several pieces of correspondence sent to these state enterprises, but we still have the issue. So my colleague, Ms. Phillips, will outline and point out some of these enterprises to you.
Morning, everyone. We at the Investments Division have been working closely with the state enterprises with a view to having them become up to date with the submission of their audited financial statements. We wrote to them in January of this year requesting financial statements. And subsequent to this submission to the Auditor General, as contained in the Auditor General's report, we have 3 companies have since submitted audited accounts: Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Business Development Limited, Evolving Technologies and Enterprise Development Company Limited, and the National Commission for Self-Help. In addition, 2 companies have held AGMs, and their audited financial statements have been sent to Parliament. That's the Vehicle Management Corporation of TNT and the National Schools Dietary Services. But the others are still a work in progress. Some have had challenges because they have changed their auditors, and some lacking staffing. For instance, some don't have corporate secretaries, but we are working with them to have them bring those accounts up to date.
Thank you. If they don't submit in a timely fashion in future, are there any repercussions for them? For staff, directors, for any personnel?
Well,
or are there any well, I'll stop there and then I'll ask my follow-up question.
Well, it's the prerogative of the Minister of Finance to change the Board of Directors if he's not happy with their performance. But other than that, we really have no recourse in terms of punitive measures.
to me, the Ministry of Finance is supposed to be the exemplary ministry when it comes to accounting and reports and stuff like that. Or else the Ministry of Finance cannot fault find any other ministry if they are making the same kinds of mistakes. On page 33 of the Auditor General's report, we have quite a number of problems that has been noted by the Auditor General. In 2.37, contracts not seen. 2.38, the vote is not updated. 2.39, the schedules of accounts amounting were not produced, and the figures are there. And then we had 2.43 from the Inland Revenue Situation Expenditure Control. 9 vouchers were authorized by the chairman in excess of the limit of $25,000. There are questions that arise from such, and it means that we have to ask the questions as to how often are our account record reviewed, if this is happening within the Ministry of Finance. So I'm asking the question, have these things been rectified with the Auditor General's Department, and how often are these accounts reviewed?
The same thing can also be asked on the same page of the Customs and Excise Division, because that falls under you too.
Variances.
And the variance is, a significant number.
Yeah.
Chairman, if I may, we have responses to the questions, Senator. We'll have responses from the Inland Revenue Division, we'll have responses from Treasury and from Customs. But just to say, you're correct, we are the ministry that's supposed to set the example. And as I said in my opening statement, we prefer not to be mentioned in the report, but given the nature of our mandate, it's unavoidable. So what we're going to try to do going forward to minimize the references to the Ministry of Finance. But just like the chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue to respond as far as page 33 is concerned and 2.43.
Good morning, Senator. The 9 vouchers they refer to, that relates to the rental of property. Right? All 9 of them. Normally, rental of property, they are normally dealt with through the Property and Real Estate Division. And these properties were not, the leases had expired. And therefore, the Auditor General had said that these expenditures should be approved by the Permanent Secretary, and this was not done. But that's what those vouchers relate to.
But while you explained it, isn't this a breach of the regulations? And if it's
it was
a breach of the
identified.
regulations,
It was identified to date. The Auditor General did point it out, and it no longer exists. All these such expenditures are now, this is since April 2016. This has stopped, and all such expenditures are approved by the Permanent Secretary.
but then the chairman know that the limit was $25,000. Was he informed clearly? Was she informed clearly? I'm sorry, ma'am.
That's okay. That of the limit? Well, the limit, they're saying here it's 25,000, but the actual limit is 50,000. Yes, I know clearly that it is 50,000. Okay.
Chairman, in defense of the chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, she has ceased and desist from that.
Then it's corrected.
Corrected, yes.
Any other response? What about Customs?
Sorry, Mr. Glenson, the Comptroller of Customs and Excise, will respond.
Thank you, Senator. Through you, Chair. We are referring to expenditure control regarding the variances to note 1 of the appropriation account. Am I correct in? Yeah. Okay. But first of all, I'd like to actually reflect on what the Permanent Secretary had related earlier as to the thankfulness that we would really give to the Auditor General's Department for pointing out certain things to us, because as we all know, and as was mentioned before, the constraints under which we would operate, and even though these procedures might seem to be regulation items and it should be followed and we should do certain things, certainly where the human factor is concerned and because of the manual systems that are in operation, we actually come with these types of inaccuracies from time to time. Suffice it to say that in all these cases, they have been taken care of, but subsequent to it being pointed out to us. So the first response would be, what are the reasons for the differing variances in the appropriation accounts submitted for audit? How can this situation be rectified? And I would simply say, after consultation with my accountant, given the time constraint, a detailed cross-check of the final accounts could not be undertaken as it relates to the variances submitted for audit. This has since been rectified, and what we have done, we have put in place certain mechanisms to avoid a repeat of such an occurrence. What systems are in place to ensure that the appropriate internal checks will be conducted before and after the preparation of the appropriation account? What we have done since, we have set up a quality verification unit that oversees these procedures, and this comprises a compliance officer and a reconciliation officer. So we are aware of what is taking place, and certainly we have done certain things to minimize these reoccurrences.
You want to follow? Okay. No. But I mean, is all of this paper-based?
Partially. In the case of what we're referring to here, yes, it is, yes.
But I mean, hasn't there been a number of years expended in time trying to automate customs and excise?
Yes, yeah.
But what's the problem then? Why can't we do that?
Well, we had made reference to the Auditor and Exchequer Act, and there are certain issues that will still have to be done in a particular way. Certain books will still have to.
Okay, so the legislation is a constraint.
Well, what we do at present, what we do, the automated system provides certain real-time information as to what would be the eventual take. But reconciling that together with Treasury and everyone else.
So the reconciliation is a human activity?
That's it, yes. Yeah.
I see, okay. But you are now automated enough to get real-time information on what has been traded and what has passed through and so on?
Yes, certainly, yes.
Okay. So that is up to date and functional?
Yes. Yes, it is, yeah.
All right. I want to ask some questions that are more macro in nature. At this point, I'm only going to go until 12:30, so we just have about 16 minutes to proceed. And anyone is free to ask any questions, whether they are nitty-gritty questions or other questions, but I just wanted to raise these, which is that, I mean, when you look at the mandate here that you mentioned, right, to facilitate revenue collection and revenue management. Okay, like, I mean, our whole system, especially in this time, rests on the amount of revenue we have given our situation. And then budget planning, preparation and management, the formulation and promotion of national fiscal and economic policy, trade facilitation and border control, debt management, and the management of the state enterprises sector. Now, there's a big mandate that involves a lot of things. But, I mean, does the ministry, who sets the priority agenda for the economy, the things that are priorities in the economy for which the budget is then prepared? How is that done?
Obviously, the government sets the economic policies and the priorities.
But that comes out of what ministry? Planning, is that it?
Planning in some cases, yes.
But it's like bringing together all the ministries to determine what are the rankings of priorities.
Like for instance, the policies in this administration, we're guided by the manifesto of the current government, which is now government's economic policy.
Yes.
And that entails a combination of all the ministries.
Okay, so the budget, the determination of budgetary allocations then is based on those priorities?
Exactly.
Okay. And how do you reconcile that with the fiscal challenges that we have of revenue on the one hand and the need to curb expenditure on the other, and basically reform the system? I'm just trying to understand and trying to help the country to remember. People are looking at this to help them understand what is involved.
As far as the budgetary process is concerned, as you're aware, Chairman, it's based on priorities, obviously. And as you're aware also in an environment of falling revenues.
Yes, I'm aware.
It becomes even more
countries are aware
important.
too.
Exactly. It becomes even more important to prioritize. For instance, I'll give you an example. In previous years, ministries would make representation for funding from the budget division of the Ministry of Finance. And at the end of the exercise, we usually have a fiscal deficit of about 20 billion at the end of that exercise. Currently, it cannot be business as usual. We have told well, at least we pointed out to all ministries that the previous model cannot work. They have to prioritize now. We cannot have a first draft of a budget at $20 billion and then let the budget division decide your priorities, okay? And to bring it down to a targeted fiscal consideration. The ministries, it's now up to the ministries to determine their priorities and approach the Ministry of Finance accordingly. As you're also aware, Chairman, from your previous incarnation, we give an envelope for the PSIP. Then we give an idea of what, if you're targeting a budget deficit, what that target would be as a percent of GDP. And then we use the assumptions of an oil price, we use the assumption of production, and we use the assumption of a gas price, and we determine the revenue. So if for instance, just hypothetically speaking, you have $20 billion in revenue, and you have expenditure at 50 billion, you're going to have to close that gap by doing something. As you know, in the previous budget, that gap is being closed by financing through external and domestic borrowing, plus the sale of assets, which could go either way. In this year's budget, for example, the expenditure is 53 billion. The core revenue is 37 billion. The deficit is 6 billion. So really and truly, there needed to be something to close that gap there, and we've seen it and we're trying to do it with the sale of assets. However, I don't know how long that will be sustainable.
Cannot be sustainable. Yes.
Right. So that's the challenge now for all ministries, to close that gap between core revenue and projected core projected revenue and core projected expenditure. That's the challenge with the priorities.
And how are you going to deal? I mean, I know I'm asking you from the point of view of Ministry of Finance, and I understand that there's a constraint there because you are more concerned with how you manage revenue and expenditure, keep the deficit down, keep ministries in line in terms of expenditure. But I mean, obviously, from your point of view, the growth side is critically important. How do you deal with that issue when you are also managing in a time of constraint?
I think what's critical here is that we maintain the public sector investment program at least 4% of GDP. which would take it around $5 to $6 billion. That is very critical, regardless of the level of revenue or projected revenue, that we maintain the public sector investment program at some point at that level of GDP. Because simply, that's where we generate our investment activity. That's where we generate our employment creation. And without that level of PSIP, we would not be able to generate the economic growth that we projected. But that being said, it's one thing to factor in that level of PSIP, but you must have the necessary implementation of the PSIP
management, yeah.
and the management of the PSIP, which is the critical factor.
All right. For instance, one of the institutions you have under you is the Public-Private Partnership Unit. Is that something that can be leveraged in a constructive way, or is it non-functional, or is it not as active as it should be? Or, I mean, I would think that supplementing public sector investment might be useful.
It's active, maybe not as active as it should be, but it's part of government's economic policy.
Okay, so do you have any projects under that could add to the growth side?
Not at this moment, but we're reviewing a few potential pilot projects.
Okay, scientists, you have any follow-up questions you want to ask? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm so glad you raised the question about public-private partnerships. I think it's such an innovative way of managing the economy, PPPs and social impact bonds in a deficit situation. And what you were saying about measurement for impact, and paraphrasing, about making sure that with the PSIP that there is effectiveness and impact associated with it. My question is about the impact assessment. How does the ministry assess which projects are successful or beneficial, which ones aren't? How strong would you say your impact assessment unit is, and how can we improve that? Are there plans in place to do that, to improve impact assessment on the whole?
Well, Senator, and to you, Chairman, as you're aware, the PSIP is really under the mandate of the Ministry of Planning and Development. But obviously, we keep an eye on the public sector investment program, because, as I said earlier, that's what generates the economic growth that we're projecting. They have a lot, not within the Ministry of Planning, and I don't want to speak for them, but Ministry of Planning and Development, they have several systems in place for checks and balances. They have units in each ministry monitoring. The ministry itself has a very well-staffed monitoring unit. And the PSIP is not only within the public service itself, it also takes into consideration an institution like WASA. WASA is part of the PSIP. It takes into consideration the Infrastructure Development Fund. So it's a wide range of activities. But so far, for this year, the implementation rate is not where it's supposed to be. It's about 30%, I think, when I last checked. We only have 3 more months of the fiscal year. I think that's something that we, as a public sector, we need to really look at very seriously in ramping up the implementation rate of the PSIP. As I said earlier again, if we don't do that, we're going to find ourselves in some major economic problems.
You think that an essential part of budgetary strategy would be a ramping up of the PSIP and proper management and implementation of that to get any measure of growth whatsoever, pulling us out of this recession?
Of course, I think that's the critical part. The capital expenditure program is the critical part.
Yeah.
You can't generate economic growth, the type of economic growth you want with recurrent expenditure.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, go ahead. You wanted to ask something, please?
Sure. Well, 2 questions. So one to the PS. Thank you for your answer. So to make sure I have the correct interpretation of what you said, you think that we have strong impact analysis. Okay. And then to the Chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, I'm curious about when the improvements are supposed to be coming on stream for revenue collections? I know it's been on stream for a while, and I'm wondering about timelines and targets.
I think I need you to be a little more specific with respect to...
Sure. Basically, our Ministry of Finance documents have said, since I was a student 15 years ago, that we've been looking at implementing a better or improved tax collection system, digitized, better technology, in order to improve our tax collections. I know that it was one of the things that was prioritized now in the current time because of the deficit and the fact that there is greater need to prevent leakage in the future. So my question is just about timelines and expectations, in keeping with the macro-oriented view now of, making sure that we have a better fiscal balance going forward. What's the timeline for the improvement within the tax revenue collections?
Well, I don't know if you're aware that, of course, the government has said that we are going towards a Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority. But all now, I mean, the organization has continued to improve. For example, one of the recent improvements would be, of course, the e-tax services that we offer now, where you can file your return online. But we continue to improve with our taxpayer services because, of course, the whole system of collection of taxes is on a voluntary compliance basis where persons assess themselves. So we have tried to improve the services that we offer to the taxpayers. Our compliance exercises, of course, have increased. So, of course, the revenue collection has improved considerably, as well as our collections process. You're asking for timelines. The mandate right now is for the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, and that is expected to start sometime, I think, in this next fiscal year. I think the PS will speak to that more. So, so that's the target right now. The focus is on this Revenue Authority for the further improvement of the organization.
Thank you for your answer. There's one statistic I learned recently, which I was so impressed by. The EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, said that when they started working with the Board of Inland Revenue to track energy companies, it also included mining companies, quarry companies specifically. And the collections improved from quarry companies from, I think, $34 million in 1 year to over $1 billion in the following year. So I want to commend what the Board of Inland Revenue is doing there with collecting greater revenue. And I'm curious about what other steps have been taken with quarry companies, as well as other companies in Trinidad and Tobago. As you did say, it's voluntary assessments, self-assessments. So what other mechanisms are being looked at to improve collections from companies that might not be paying and not be declaring and might not even be registered?
Thank you, Senator. Well, the issue specifically with regard to the quarrying company and using information through the EITI process has all helped us in the compliance approach. We are using a number of various data from a number of different organizations, even large taxpayers, in an attempt to gather as much information so that it will help us to do all the necessary compliance check to see where we are going and what sort of reporting we have in terms of accuracy. And it has worked well, and it's continued to do better. We have a strong IT system, strong database system, which is driving that particular initiative. In addition to that, we do have our regular routine audit checks and various other compliance activity to ensure total compliance. Okay.
Just a quick follow-up. I noticed from the Auditor General's report, a lot of these quarries are unlicensed. And I mean, isn't one solution to the problem simply indicating that before your license can be renewed or before you can get one, that you show your last 5 years of payment of taxes to inland revenue? And would that solve your revenue problem and also the legitimacy of these institutions?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. We have seen that the imposition of those sort of requirements sometimes prohibit business. So whilst we would want to say that, yes, it will help us, we have to strike a delicate balance of whether we are putting restriction in terms of business moving forward. We have instances where we do, for purposes of tenders of contract to government agency, where is the requirement to obtain a tender certificate. And of course, it could be looked at to see whether the same could apply, as you had mentioned, to the quarrying industry and its registration.
Well, how could insisting that they pay their taxes be bad for business?
Well, it was a point raised previously that, whatever tax authority does to collect the taxes, regardless of the regulatory aspect in terms of operation.
Yes, exactly.
Business.
And let the regulator deal with that. You can't do the regulator's job. You do your job, which is to collect money for the revenue. And they will do their job, which is how to regularize, and legitimize their work.
And the Ministry of Energy.
It's just that, but you see, if they ask that it be supported by recent tax payments, then that would ensure that you get your money, and also they will be in a position to legitimize them with some information. Right now, it's a kind of free for all down there,
To the Permanent Secretary. And the Auditor General's report on page 35, it is noted that there was a circular number 3 dated 2005, July 29th, with regards to the requirements of the ministry to submit to the Controller of Accounts the personal information of employees, and all the relevant documentations because of the delay in provisions of separations and pension benefits. Have there been subsequent letters sent to ministries informing them that they have not adhered to the request of the ministry? And if so, if they have not, what is being put in place to ensure that accounting officers and pension and leave officers fulfill their mandate, and in so doing limit the struggles of people who have retired? What is the ministry doing? Because this letter is dated 2005. What has been done subsequent to 2005?
Chairman, if I may, thank you, Senator. Again, I'm glad you reported this question on pension and leaves, because it's my pet peeve of mine. And as I tell all my colleagues, we're all going to retire one day, and we're going to be faced with this situation. And I can assure you that the Controller of Accounts, they write constantly to these ministries asking for updated records. But the problem is not necessarily only at the Controller, at the Treasury Division. It's a serious problem outside in the line ministries. It's not from one to trying. I'm aware of that. But we're not going to stop trying. We're going to try to fix this situation. Even at when we have permanent secretaries meetings, we have decided that there's a board of permanent secretaries that meet every month. We have engaged the Controller of Accounts and her team to have discussions with all permanent secretaries on how we could solve this situation, because it is absolutely an untenable situation where, as I mentioned earlier, you retire at 60 and you don't get, sometimes you die before you get your pension, and, or you retire at 60 and you don't get part of your gratuity, your pension, until you're 63 or 64. I can't imagine being in that situation.
Thank you, Chair. In addition to what the Permanent Secretary indicated, just to inform you that we have drafted a new circular. It's being reviewed presently, and it should be sent out to ministries and departments in the next month. Further, I'd like to add that one of the challenges that ministries and departments they are faced with is the realignment of ministries that happened in the last few years. And that has contributed to their service records being separated by different ministries with their movements. And I think that is one of the main challenges in providing the pension leave records to the Treasury. Further, earlier this year, April 2017, we met with the accounting officers, and they were sensitized as to the gravity of the situation with the pension leave records. And we beseech them to try to work with their ministry as well, and for us to collaborate with each other so that we could improve the submission of documents to the Treasury. That is just a little update.
It's a final question, and it's about debt. Within the last several months, we've accumulated new debt of about $13 billion, just over that. And the debt itself might be worrisome, but I mean, I think the real issue is the repayment of this debt over time, and that relates to the management of expenditure at a lower level from the, first of all, about 60, and then now last year to 53, perhaps even lower than that. And the growth side of the equation. What do you think that, given the level of borrowing that we have at the present time, that we have any room for the accumulation of more debt and the ability to satisfy repayment of that debt going forward? I think it's a question that is on people's mind in the public, because they may not know the numbers, but they know that we're in a difficult situation in terms of revenue. They know that we are accumulating debt, and people are concerned about what that is going to mean. Would you care to comment on that?
Chairman, as you're aware, you run fiscal deficits, you have to borrow to finance the fiscal deficit. Whether it's on the domestic market or it's on the external market, you have to borrow. Right now, our debt to GDP ratio is about 61%.
Yeah,
but this may be a controversial statement, but I don't see, there's no number that you can say then there's a slippery slope. It's the trajectory of the debt. Your ability to finance the debt is the issue.
Well, yeah, that second one is
exactly
the
ability to finance the debt going on. And in many instances, we have sinking funds put aside for financing of our debt. It's something that we brought up in many cases with the credit rating agencies, our ability to finance the debt. As I said, there's no fixed number. There's no international benchmarks. There are developed countries who are over 100%. There are developing countries with less than 20% of debt to GDP ratio. But you don't want to mortgage another generation. It's not our plan.
And we don't want to be, well, we almost like Barbados, but we don't want to get
exactly. We don't want to get there. So the idea is to manage the borrowing as much as possible. You close that fiscal gap, you manage the borrowing. It's as simple as that.
All right, but from your point of view, I mean, you feel, given this situation going down the road, that we will be able to manage that?
I think right now the debt is manageable, very much so. Even I wouldn't say that we should borrow
in addition.
Yes. But right now I would say the debt is manageable.
And this is just an aside. If you don't want to answer it, you don't need to answer it. One of the sources of debt that we've taken is from the Deutsche Bank. And this has now become a controversial bank in terms of what is happening in the U.S. Does that affect us in any way?
Not that I'm aware at the moment, but maybe I could ask the PS who is responsible for that if she has a comment.
Yes, Deutsche Bank was actually our manager for the last international bond issue.
Not the source of that?
They weren't the source of the debt.
Okay.
So there's no
And,
issue
well,
going
that
forward.
makes a difference.
Yes, right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very, very much. I will have to close this now. It took you longer than I intended to. But I must say that the Ministry of Finance have given what, in my view, has been a very straightforward account of itself, and I thank you for that. And I know in the Ministry of Finance, generally, we have a good team of people, and I wish you all the best going forward. I want to thank the members of the Auditor General's team. Before I continue, I just want to ask them if they might have any. I'll allow just one question if you would ask, or any comment that you might make about the Ministry of Finance's response. Would anybody like to respond? Make a comment on their contribution here this morning?
So we just want to say that we thank you for the opportunity to be being present here to hear the responses from the Ministry of Finance, because as we listen, we are taking note, because that will certainly have an impact on our audit programs going forward.
Yeah.
And we have also taken note, with regard to the interest that has been raised by the members of this committee, because that also indicates to us things that we may need to consider in terms of tweaking our audit programs going forward. But I would also want to say that we do have certain issues in here, internal control issues, monitoring issues that we raised. But we would also want to say that based from last year to now, we would want to commend the Control of Accounts Division, which is responsible for the accounting function for at least 8 or 9 of the divisions of Ministry of Finance, in terms that they took note of our recommendations, and they did seek to improve on their own internal control functions within their own district. So we really want to recognize that efforts were made to take note of what we said, and they did seek to improve it. And that is basically about all we have to say at this point in time. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much again to Ministry of Finance, the Permanent Secretary and his team, Auditor General's office, headed by the Acting Auditor General. And thanks to the media for being present. And thank you all very, very much, my own colleagues. Okay?